I've been at the Nudge Challenge before, but it was the Dutch edition. And this is a quite diverse group, so I'm just wondering from what continent you are. And if you can, I mean, depending on how you define from what continent you are, I'll leave that up to you. But I'm just curious, for example, like South America, who's from South America? We have, 3. North America? Africa? Europe? Shocker. Asia? And then Australia Pacific? I got that. Okay. Good to know, because as a climate activist, I focus on climate change every day and how it impacts the world in every corner, whether you're in Europe or on the one of the poles. It is impacting us every day. And I've been doing my work for more than 8 years. When it comes to sustainability, I think as a child I was very aware of that, of how we go about the environment and how it impacts us as human beings. And for me, it's a form of social injustice. And I think that's also the reason why I feel very strongly about the work I do and why it impacts me, and also why it sometimes even makes me depressed when I read the news and I read about another report or another flood or another drought or another form of extreme weather that's related to climate change, because it's impacting human beings. So climate change is about us, and I think sustainability is about us as human beings. It's about justice. And a few years ago, I think actually it's exactly 6 years ago now, I was in prison in Russia. And next slide. This is how it looked like when I was in court. This is not how it looks like in prison, because then you can't really see other people because you're stuck alone. But 6 years ago I was in prison because I took an action that I believed that had to be done. We went to the Arctic to protest against oil drilling in the Arctic that we thought was just insane when it comes to the whole logic of climate change, going to new reserves, pumping them up and burning them. If you look at the whole carbon logic, we cannot afford to even burn, I think, about 80% of the proven reserves of fossil fuels, let alone go to new frontiers like the Arctic to explore for new fields of oil and gas. Set aside from the fact that the risk that involves, the potential risk of an oil spill in such a pristine area, and actually the limited possibilities you have to do something about it. So we were running a campaign that was called Save the Arctic for a number of years, but we would still see an oil rush of oil companies going to the Arctic. So as Greenpeace, we thought it's time to do a peaceful and non-violent protest by taking one of our ships and going to where it's actually taking place, where the form of environmental injustice, where the form of social injustice was taking place. This was not without consequences, as one can imagine, and we ended up in jail. We were facing 10 to 15 years. And by the way, did we commit any crimes? We didn't. We did do some form of misdemeanor, which according to the law of the sea would mean like a fine of about 22 euros. And obviously, when we take an action and you do some sort of trespassing or a misdemeanor, or you even break the law, we always do that consciously and with an open mind, and we always are ready to bear the consequences. It's very much in the spirit of what Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King did. If you do something because you think it's important and it entails breaking the law, then you also bear the consequences, and that's the highest possible regard you can have for the law, even if that law sometimes needs to be changed. Though the difference between a 22 euro fine and 10 to 15 years is rather big, and obviously the trial that we got was not really fair. After a lot of international pressure, because we were in prison with about 30 people from 18 different countries, so there was a lot of international pressure. It was right before the Olympic Games that were in Sochi later that year, and I think that really contributed to getting us out of jail, luckily after 2 months. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because when I got out of prison, people were asking me, why did you take that action? Why did you take such a big risk to save the Arctic? And for me, it made sense to take such a big risk. But for a lot of people who actually did really support the action, didn't necessarily understand what was happening or why I did that. And I told them, well, it's quite simple. We're gambling with our future. You know, if you follow the signs like I do, if you know what's going to happen, if you know what's already happening and that we're just at the beginning, you'll understand why I think it's necessary and why sometimes I think it's worth taking the risk in order to protect our future. And I think I'm looking at the back, Pepijn, because the next slide was going to be a video. And it's a video about a woman called Joanna Sustento. She's from the Philippines. And she, I think, explains very well through her story what the link is between humanity and sustainability. But I'm just looking at the back if we can get us started. Do you want me to push another button or no?
From the biggest of tragedies, hope can be found. My name is Joanna Sustento. I had a happy life, a good job, great friends, and a wonderful, loving family. But in a matter of minutes, all of that changed. For those who experienced Haiyan, the strongest typhoon ever recorded, it was apocalyptic. I witnessed my mother, my father, brother, sister-in-law, and my 3-year-old nephew being swept away by the storm surge. It left my brother and me to search for our family's bodies in the aftermath. We never found our father and our nephew. It's difficult to be the one left behind. You have to deal with all the questions, the grief, the pain, and the regrets. Typhoon Haiyan killed more than 10,000 people and left over 14 million people homeless. But it's not just statistics and numbers in a news report. This is about us, the people. Climate change affects everyone. People around the world are now taking a stand and fighting for a basic human right to a stable, safe, and healthy climate. Typhoon survivors and other frontline communities in the Philippines and Pacific Islands, Indigenous peoples in Canada, Swiss grannies and United States youth, Norwegian and Dutch plaintiffs, allied organizations, and Greenpeace supporters. These are just some of the people rising above the challenges of the climate crisis and reaching for a better future for us all. We are already proving to the world and to ourselves that this story does not end there.
I remember I met Joanna 2 years ago, and I heard her tell her story in person, and it made me and I think everybody in the room cry. I was really blown away by her strength. She's a climate activist. After what happened to her family, after losing practically everybody, she was very down, obviously, for a long time. But in order also to honor her family, she thought, I need to take the responsibility to show to the rest of the world what climate change does, that it's already a matter of life and death. And she's now being very active as a climate activist. And for me, she's just one of the most inspirational people I've ever met in my life. And sometimes, and I myself, I'm born and raised in the Netherlands. My family is from Morocco. Sometimes I get confronted by people out in the streets or on social media, or when I go to events like these and say something about climate change or sustainability, I have people that come up and say, like, why do you do actually this kind of thing? Like, sustainability and stuff, that's kind of like an elite thing. And then I think, God, you're dead wrong. You are so wrong to think that this is such an elite thing. Get out of your little Dutch bubble and look outside, look at like beyond your borders and look what's happening. Look how many people are already impacted. Does anybody know how much the global average temperature has already risen? No? Anybody like a hunch? How much we're already above the... It's 1.1 degrees. 1.1 degrees. We have to keep it under 1.5 degrees. So we don't have much time to go. And I'm going to show you, give you just a few examples of the things that happened just this year. And it doesn't cover everything that's happened, but just a few examples of how climate change is impacting us as human beings. So this are people in Somalia that are trying to get some food packages because they're fleeing areas that are stricken by drought for a long period, an exceptionally long period. And a lot of these farmers have experienced that their cattle are dying, so for them it was reason to move along. And now they're dependent on help. Another example is this one in Bolivia. This happened earlier this year. In some parts of the country there were floods and landslides. And this is one of the camps where some of the 70,000 people that got displaced are being brought under. Earlier this year, in March and April, there were floods in the southwest of Iran. 500,000 people were impacted. In fact, 500,000 people became homeless. Maybe some of you can guess where this one is? You? Could be, but no. It's California. But it could also be Russia. It could also be Portugal. It could also be Greece, because they were all hit by forest fires due to climate change this year. Amazon, no, because those fires have been started by human beings, but the Amazon was also pretty much in raging in fire this year. This one is in India, August, so not too long ago. People in the south were hit by floods due to excessive rain, and these are a group of people that are going back home. So when I do my work every day, for me it's very much about empathy. It's very much about me trying to take care of that other human being, whether it's my little sister, whether it's my colleague, whether it's my neighbor, or that other person at the other side of the world. For me, being a climate activist is very much trying to take care of that other human being. It's caring for each other. And more importantly, and this is why climate change and sustainability is very much also about a form of justice, and nowadays it's also coined as climate justice. It's very much about the right to life, the right to food, the right to access clean water, the right to have like a rooftop above your head. And it's one of the most fundamental things when... I'm looking at the slides, Pepijn, but is there something going? Okay, then I'll just carry on. It's very much the right to have a future, and it's very much about us taking responsibility for the consequences. So when you think about sustainability and when you think of the human factor, sustainability is basically all about the human factor. It's not just about protecting the trees and the bees and so on, which a lot of people think. I mean, of course it's all about that. But in the end, it's also about taking care of ourselves, trying to preserve humanity, and doing it in a way that we, how to put it in the right words, doing it in a way where we have empathy and sympathy for the other, because as we can all see, the worse climate change will get, the more you will see the differences between classes grow. And you can already see it now happening. If you look at the places that are hit the hardest by climate change, they're also actually the people that have contributed the least about climate change, yet they are very much the biggest victims on the planet. So it's very much about how do we also, especially from countries in the north, show our solidarity, and how do we support the people in the global south in order to tackle one of the biggest threats humanity is facing. When I was at Nudge, I think the first time I had a talk here, I remember seeing a group of young people that were incredibly ambitious and, you know, ready to do a challenge and to make their career, but also to do something good for the world. In my day, in my job, I meet a lot of people that are extremely ambitious and very much willing to make a change. But sometimes I'm a bit surprised by how people take about the way they want to make change. So my question to you is, when you go back after this challenge, when you go back home, when you go back to your job and back to your regular life, what's important for you? Is it to be successful or is it to be impactful? Because they sometimes go together, but they don't always go together. So do you want to be, at the end of the day, in 5 years or 10 years down the road, do you want to be like that manager that has a great title and has a good income and think you have like a bit more mandate on the working floor or whatever you want to achieve or be higher up in the ladder? Or is it about where in society, whether it's at that corporation or back at home or the country you live in, what position do you want to take in to make the biggest change? And that's something I wanted to give to you to think about. Thank you.